Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Ecolab's public health webinar titled Zika virus, Strategies to Reduce Infection Risk. Our presenters today are Dr. Joelle Olson and Dr. John Hanlon. Dr. Olson is Ecolab's lead entomologist. In this role, she works closely with the Ecolab research and development teams to develop new technologies and programs for the Ecolab Pest Elimination Division. Dr. Hanlon is Ecolab's Vice President of Food Safety and Public Health. In this role, he works closely with the Ecolab research and development teams to develop new technologies and programs for safe water, infection prevention, and food contamination. Again, during today's presentation, if you'd like to ask any questions, please do so using the Q&A feature in the WebEx Center. Now, I will turn you over to Dr. Joelle Olson.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar. I'll start off today's presentation with some key takeaways and then conduct a brief introduction to mosquito biology and behavior. Then I'll turn it over to Dr. Hanlon to discuss Zika virus in more detail. And after that, Dr. Hanlon will turn the presentation back over to me, where I'll finish up with a summary of some of the ways you can reduce your risk of mosquitoes and the Zika virus. After we finish the formal presentation today, Dr. Hanlon and I will be happy to take some questions from the audience. So please, as a reminder, continue to type in your questions throughout today's presentation. All right, so here's just an overview of some of the key takeaways from today's session. First off, mosquitoes are one of the deadliest animals on this planet. They have the ability to transmit viruses such as Zika virus, as well as dengue and chikungunya. These diseases can cause significant illness, long-term health effects, and hospitalization, which in some cases can even result in death. Ecolab has developed a three-step mosquito program that can help reduce your risk of infection and reduce your risk of mosquito bites for both you, your guests, and your staff. All right, let's get started with a brief introduction to mosquito significance in biology. Mosquitoes are vectors for many different diseases, including dengue, chikungunya, West Nile virus, malaria, yellow fever, and encephalitis. But the one that you probably heard about more recently, based on the media attention and some of the noteworthy headlines, is Zika. Dr. Hanlon will cover more on the details of the virus in a few moments, but regardless of whether or not Zika is present in your area of business or residence, mosquitoes in general can pose some significant negative effects. For example, the presence of mosquitoes can negatively impact publicity during peak season and the media hype. You may see, with that media hype, you may see an increase in staff and customer complaints. In some of these cases, these complaints can lead to compensation of guests or the customer. And in general, mosquito activity can cause wariness of the traveler or guest, which can ultimately result in a decrease in bookings or outings of the typical consumer. And with the popularity in social media these days, it's especially important to ensure every guest or customer experiences a pest-free environment during their stay or their visit to your facility. So let's take a moment and talk about mosquito biology and behavior. All mosquitoes require a blood meal to reproduce and a source of water for their aquatic stages to develop into the adult stages. This water source must be stagnant and contain organic debris for the aquatic stages to successfully develop into adults. Worldwide, there are over 3,500 species of mosquitoes. In the United States, there's a little over 175 different species. Not quite as many as worldwide, but there are many that are capable of spreading disease, and some that are even capable of spreading the Zika virus. The two species of mosquito responsible for transmission of the Zika virus are Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, otherwise known as the yellow fever mosquito and the Asian tiger mosquito. Collectively, these two species are known as container breeding groups of mosquitoes because they typically lay their eggs inside small containers that fill with rainwater and remain stagnant for several days. These two species of mosquitoes are closely related and share similar biology and habits. In addition to being active at dawn and dusk, like most other species of mosquitoes, these two are most active during the day, and they prefer to enter indoors and within structures where they can find a blood source to feed from. They can be persistent biters, meaning that they can feed multiple times throughout their adult life, which also increases the potential for these two to be successful vectors of disease. As I mentioned earlier, all species of mosquitoes are semi-aquatic, with the egg, larval, and pupal stages requiring water to develop and survive. The adults require a blood meal to develop eggs, and the entire life cycle is completed in about 8 to 10 days, depending, of course, on the temperature and humidity in the environment. But one behavior that is unique about the Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus species is that they can develop in as little as just a tablespoon of water. And the female will often deposit eggs in multiple locations around the area that is pristine for their biology and behavior. This makes identification of the potential breeding sites slightly more difficult. In addition, they often lay or deposit their eggs within dry substrate or just above the water line of a container, so that when the rain falls and it fills with water, the eggs will hatch in much larger numbers to increase the potential of finding mates and continuing on with the life cycle. The eggs that are deposited in the drier substrate can actually survive for 2 to 3 years in some states or some areas of the world. And they'll remain that way until the conditions are suitable for hatching, where the rain level increases inside the container. Therefore, it's extremely important to identify and remove all those potential breeding sites from the property on a regular basis. This is something your pest management provider can assist you with during routine services. Potential breeding sites for the 2 Aedes mosquitoes that are responsible for vectoring the Zika virus may include flower pots, drains, gutters, old tires, tree holes, potholes in the parking lot, plants that capture pooling water. This is all in addition to small ponds, ditches, and other land depressions that could fill with stagnant water for several days. It's also important to pay attention to landscaping changes or areas on the property with poor drainage fields, because these areas can also be conducive to mosquito breeding sites. The Aedes adults are poor flyers in those adult stages, and they tend not to fly too far away from their breeding source, generally under a half a mile or so. And they take frequent breaks in their flight pattern. So once they emerge from their breeding sites, they'll be looking for cool, dark areas to rest between host searching and egg laying. This may include areas like dark hallways, decks, eaves, or overhangs on the structure. They also prefer to rest on vegetation around the structure. So this may include thick grass or broadleaf plants, and that is where they prefer to rest actually on the underside of the leaves to remain protected from the sun and other environmental conditions during the day. The fact that they don't fly too far away from their breeding source and that they take frequent breaks in their flight patterns makes it possible to significantly reduce the population of these 2 species on a property basis rather than requiring control efforts on a larger scale like some of the other species of mosquitoes. Just by taking the time to remove the breeding sites on property and by treating the potential harborage areas, you can create a barrier of protection and significantly reduce your risk of interacting with these 2 species in particular. I will talk more about some of the ways that you can reduce your risk a little bit later, but for now I'm going to transfer the presentation over to Dr. Hanlon to continue the session.
Thanks, Joelle. So building on Joelle's description of mosquito biology and in particular the Aedes genus, we'll turn our attention now to its preferred geographies. So the preferred habitat for them is around the more tropical and subtropical regions of the world. The map that you see here shows the distribution patterns for the Aedes aegypti on top and Aedes albopictus species on the bottom. There are some differences, most notably in the U.S. and Australia. In the U.S., Aedes albopictus has a slightly broader range, and both are most common in the south and southeastern portions of the United States. However, I want to remind all of you that even though the mosquito species is present in these areas, it doesn't mean that the virus, or in this case, the Zika virus, is present. So let's get right up to date. This map shows the countries and territories that are reporting active Zika virus transmission. And as you can see, the majority of countries in South America, Central America, Mexico, and in the U.S., in particular Florida and Texas, have reported active transmission of the Zika virus. With respect to the U.S., local transmission of Zika virus has been reported in South Florida and in Brownsville, Texas, and both have been designated as precautionary areas. So we'll shift gears for a moment and turn our attention to the disease known as Zika virus disease. Zika virus was first discovered in 1947 and is named after the Zika forest in Uganda. In 1952, the first human cases of Zika were detected, and since then, outbreaks of Zika have been reported in tropical Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. Zika outbreaks have probably occurred in many locations. However, the world began to take notice in 2015 when outbreaks were detected in Brazil and reports began to surface of potential birth defects being related to Zika virus disease. In February 2016, the World Health Organization declared Zika to be a public health emergency of international concern. And as more and more outbreaks and geographic spread of Zika were reported, a public health emergency was reported in Puerto Rico. Local transmission was also reported in Dade County, Florida, and 6 months ago in Brownsville, Texas. Again, with respect to mosquito-borne transmission in the U.S. and its territories, Florida, Puerto Rico, and Brownsville, Texas have really been the front lines in terms of the fight against Zika in the U.S. As of April 2017 of this year, the CDC had reported 218 presumed mosquito-borne cases in Florida and 6 in Brownsville, Texas. And that's from July 1st, 2017 through April of this year. There have been no reported cases of mosquito-borne transmission in the U.S. in 2017, but this may change as our mosquito season develops. So we know that Zika virus is a mosquito-borne disease that can be transmitted primarily by Aedes aegypti, but also by Aedes albopictus. What is particularly worrisome is that most people infected with Zika virus won't exhibit symptoms and therefore won't know if they have the disease. Only 1 in 5 people will develop symptoms. The symptoms of Zika virus infection include headache, fever, skin rash, joint pain, and conjunctivitis, or a reddening of the eye. And these symptoms develop 2 to 7 days after being bitten by a mosquito. And the World Health Organization reports that 148 countries and territories have reported Zika virus disease, and 84 of them have been outbreaks since 2015 onwards. There are several modes of infection transmission, from the bite of an infected mosquito, and as Joelle mentioned, the same species that carry dengue and chikungunya virus. During pregnancy, where a pregnant woman can pass the Zika virus to her fetus. Through sex, Zika virus can be sexually transmitted from an infected man to his partners. And there's also emerging evidence that Zika virus can be spread through blood transfusions and organ and tissue transplantation. And as I mentioned earlier, Zika virus disease can be passed from a pregnant woman to her unborn baby. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, there is now enough evidence to conclude that Zika virus infection during pregnancy is a cause of microcephaly and other severe fetal brain defects, including eye defects, hearing loss, and impaired growth. In terms of the current situation in the U.S. and its territories, here's the situation. The CDC reports about 5,000 travel-related cases in the U.S., 224 locally acquired cases, presumably mosquito-borne, 218 in Florida, and 6 in Texas. In the U.S. territories, over 36,000 locally acquired cases have been reported, with the majority of them being reported in Puerto Rico. Given the potential geographic range of the Aedes mosquito in the U.S., I would suspect that we're going to hear more about locally acquired cases in the U.S. as mosquito season develops. So we need to be particularly vigilant in the blue and the green shaded areas on this map. Before I turn it back over to Joelle, I'll close with some insights that Dr. Mike Osterholm at the University of Minnesota shared earlier this year. He commented that outbreaks and cases of Zika virus disease will increase over the next 2 to 3 years, followed by periodic outbreaks, similar to what we're currently seeing for both dengue and chikungunya. The fact that sexual transmission of Zika virus disease occurs will amplify the public health threat globally. And as more people become infected, the pool will become larger for mosquitoes to spread the infection. So I'll now turn it back over to Joelle, who will specifically talk about reduction of risk.
All right, thanks, John. I'm going to talk about some of the ways that you can reduce your risk. And so there are many different ways that we can do that. First, raising awareness with your customers and your staff about the risk factors associated with the Zika virus. You can leverage materials produced by the CDC and the World Health Organization, or you can utilize Ecolab's own infographic presented here to help train your staff on the important aspects of this virus. It's also important to eliminate mosquito breeding sites, such as areas with standing water or that have potential to house standing water. Those should all be addressed. Your pest management provider can help assess your property so that these areas can be properly managed. You can also work with your community leaders to help engage the local community and make control efforts more widespread in order to benefit everyone in the area. And lastly, it's important to reduce your risk of exposure to mosquito bites during an outbreak of the virus. So in addition to protecting yourself and your property, there are also many steps that you can take to protect your customers and your employees at your properties. First, remove those potential breeding sites. This could be as simple as emptying or removing items that catch and hold rainwater, or it could involve filling potholes in the parking lots or altering the landscape to reduce potential breeding sites and resting sites. Check your gutters and drains for pooling water sources and clear any blockage that might be creating a mosquito breeding site. Install or fix damaged window screens to prevent entry or access into the structure, and leave fans running during the day and the night to create that wind speed that makes it difficult for mosquitoes to fly into the structure. Remember, I stated earlier that these two species in particular are poor flyers, and so any type of wind speed will help reduce them from entering the structure. Educate your staff and your customers on how to prevent mosquito breeding sites and to protect yourself. And finally, another important step to reducing mosquito pressure at your property is to partner with a pest management company. And in partnering with a pest management company, here's how Ecolab can help. Ecolab's science-based 3-step program is specifically designed to help reduce mosquito pressure at your facility. The first step includes a thorough inspection of the facility to identify potential breeding sites and adult resting sites. And recommendations will then be made if there are items on the property that can be addressed by the property manager. If the potential breeding sites cannot be addressed, Step 2, listed here as prevent, includes the treatment of potential breeding sites using larvicides. These larvicide products are environmentally friendly and developed to specifically target and kill mosquito larvae without harming the environment or non-target organisms. The final step, Step 3, which is called protect, includes the treatment of potential adult resting sites using specialized equipment to get product to the areas on the structure and around the structure in the vegetation, such as areas under the leaves where the adults are typically found during the day. This final step also includes the inspection and maintenance of mosquito traps that are placed in those high-risk areas such as outdoor dining areas or pool areas. And they're used to intercept mosquito activity, to monitor the level of activity, and determine whether service frequency should be increased during times or seasons with high mosquito pressure. I have a couple of case studies that I just want to mention here The first one was conducted in Mexico in 2015, where mosquito activity was monitored by placing adult mosquito traps in those key areas that I just mentioned, where people are often present outdoors. And when we implemented the three-step program, we saw mosquito activity in the area decrease by 80% and customer complaints reduced by 90% just within the first 6 weeks of initiating the program. This location continues to be satisfied with the results of this study and the ongoing services that are provided by Ecolab. One more quick case study here. This is the second one that was conducted in Brazil in 2016, and you can see that within just 5 weeks of implementing the program, they also observed a 75% reduction in mosquito activity in the traps that were placed on site. So this just demonstrates again that the products and services provided had a significant impact on the mosquito population in the area. All right, I'd just like to finish up today's presentation by showing a few additional resources that are available to you. So in addition to Ecolab, there are a variety of resources available from the CDC for more information about Zika and mosquito control. And many of these resources are created for specific groups of individuals that are seeking information, such as pregnant women, parents, or travelers. And I referenced it earlier, but you can also utilize the Ecolab infographic that you see on the slide here for training and educational purposes for yourself and for your staff and for your customers. These documents can all be accessed by the websites listed here as well.
All right, thank you. This concludes our formal presentation for today. We will now move into the Q&A portion of today's presentation. And just a reminder that you can go into the Q&A chat function and enter your questions right now. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what questions we have received. All right, we've got our first one here. John, can you explain the difference between travel and locally acquired cases of Zika?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I'd be more than happy to. First of all, it's a very good question and something that we want to be aware of. So, travel-related case would be a situation where a person, an uninfected person, travels to a region where there are outbreaks of Zika virus or where Zika virus disease is endemic, gets infected with Zika virus, and then brings the infection home. So that would be a definition of a travel-related case. In terms of locally acquired cases, and we've seen a couple of hundred in Florida, we've seen half a dozen in Brownsville, and north of 35,000 locally acquired cases in Puerto Rico. That would be a situation where an infected mosquito bites a person and then transmits the infection to that person. Or another way of locally acquired infection would be an uninfected mosquito bites an infected person, picks up the Zika virus during a blood meal, and then that mosquito goes on and bites a second person who might be uninfected, and the mosquito has now transferred or transmitted the virus to the second person. So locally acquired is primarily associated with vector-borne or transmitted through the bite of an infected mosquito on site.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, our next question asks, which insect repellents work best to prevent infections caused by mosquito bites?
So the question about insect repellents, there are a few products out there that we would recommend, but mostly just based on their active ingredients. So when looking at mosquito repellents that are on the shelf at a local hardware store or another place where you're purchasing these type of products, you want to look at the label and look at the active ingredients that's listed. And so one of the products we recommend is any DEET-based repellent. And so when you look at the active ingredient DEET, D-E-E-T, you want to look for a product that is greater than 20% DEET. That'll give you several hours of protection against the biting stages of the mosquito. Another repellent product that might be recommended as well would be one that is picaridin-based. That's Picardin, picaridin. That can also give some relief to mosquito biting stages as well. There are a few more naturally based products, but they generally do not offer as long term of protection. But there are a few of those as well. And in those cases, we actually recommend that you use products with the active ingredients at a lower percentage, so somewhere lower than 20%, because sometimes those essential oil-based products can have an irritating effect on the skin as well. So those are the different products that we would recommend to repel mosquitoes.
So, Dr. Olson, here's a follow-up question in regards to what we're just speaking about in insect repellents. The question is, how should insect repellents be used on children to prevent mosquito bites and the viruses that some mosquitoes can spread?
Okay, that's a really good question, and I think it's important to make sure that you're reading the product labels because there would be recommendations there. So it will vary from product to product and on what age of children it's appropriate to apply mosquito repellent. So always ensure that you read the product label because it does vary. And also there's additional recommendations on the CDC website specifically for applying products to children.
Thank you. All right, one of the next questions that we have here asks, what is the status or likelihood of developing a vaccine?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Melissa. That's a very good question. I know that there are a number of groups that are working on a vaccine, but I honestly think it will be quite some time before we see anything. But I would come back to some of the key points that Joelle made a few minutes ago, that for the time being, we need to rely on preventing mosquito bites. We need to rely on removing and eliminating their breeding grounds, and just really have awareness of the public health significance of not only the Aedes species, which carry Zika, dengue, and chikungunya, but also mosquitoes in general that can carry a number of other viral and parasitic diseases. So the focus right now needs to be on preventing biting and mosquito control.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Hanlon. All right, so the next question, now that we're entering some of the warmer months here in the United States, should we be concerned about Zika in the U.S. outside of Florida and Texas?
I'm happy to pick that one up. So according to the CDC, we've had reports of vector-borne transmission in Miami-Dade County and Brownsville, Texas. That goes back to last summer and last November, respectively. And while to this point we haven't seen any reports of local, presumably mosquito-borne transmission in these regions or other regions, you need to remember that we are very early into mosquito season, and this is something that we're watching very closely. And I'll go back to that chart that I showed maybe about 5 or 10 minutes ago, where I showed the blue map and the green map. And if you are living or operating properties, at least within the U.S., if you are living or operating properties within that blue region or that green region, then for Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, you definitely want to be taking this very seriously. And I would encourage you to implement a mosquito program in your properties for a couple of reasons. Number one, to protect your guests and your residents, but also to protect your staff, and also to really work with community leaders to reduce the potential for infectious disease risk.
All right, thank you. Our next question, Dr. Olson, I believe this is something that you can help answer. Does the water need to be calm for mosquito breeding? If there's a fountain, does that minimize or eliminate breeding?
Okay, yep, I can take that question. So I think definitely we want to be looking for water sources that are stagnant with low levels of movement, and they must contain some type of organic debris for the larval stages to develop and feed from. And those sources need to remain for generally about a week's time. The timing can vary depending on the temperature and humidity of the environment, but generally about a week. As long as those water sources are remaining there for about a week, they can develop through their entire life cycle. And also keep in mind, too, with the two Aedes species that we talked about today here that are at risk of vectoring the virus, the Zika virus and dengue and chikungunya, those ones in particular don't need much water at all. Just a tablespoon of water is sufficient to sustain that larval stage and help them develop into adult stages. So the water must remain calm. And as far as fountains in particular, when we think about some of the decorative water sources that are on some of the some resort properties and some of the other maybe outdoor dining areas, when we talk about the decorative water sources, they often contain additional products and sometimes chlorine-based products to help reduce bacterial growth and other things in those type of structures. So those are not suitable for mosquito breeding habitat. So as long as the water is moving and the water has been treated with other products to help reduce bacteria, that will not be a suitable source for mosquitoes. But I am not by any means suggesting that water sources should be treated with chlorine-based products if it's a natural body of water or if it's a water source that could drain into a natural body of water, because that could be very harmful to the environment. So those are just some things to consider as far as mosquito breeding sites go.
All right, Dr. Olson, here's another question for you. How many times can a female mosquito lay eggs during the lifespan?
Well, it depends on the species. And so when we're talking about these Aedes aegypti species in particular, they will lay several eggs over their lifetime, and up to hundreds over the course of their lifetime, even up to thousands over. So they're generally laying eggs within a 30-day time period. Once they emerge from the larval stages, the adults will quickly find mates, and then they'll start to be able to reproduce and deposit eggs. And so that female will continue depositing eggs over several days, which could be up to a month in their adult stage in that lifespan. And with that, they're depositing those eggs over multiple areas and spots. They do that to ensure the successful survivorship of their next generation. So they're looking for multiple sources to ensure that is successful. And that's where it's really important to have someone that is a trained professional to be able to conduct a survey or a risk assessment survey of the area to understand where all of those potential breeding sites are. And because that can change over weeks or months, it's important to continue to have that inspection done so that we can remove those potential sources and stop the life cycle of the mosquito.
Thank you. All right, a couple more questions we have here. Dr. Hanlon, was Zika virus a significant factor at the Rio Olympics last summer?
Yeah, that's a great question. We certainly heard an awful lot about it prior to the Olympics and very little after. So what I have heard from public health officials is that it was not a significant factor in the Rio Olympics. And let me just add some commentary to that. I think it was probably related to several things. Certainly there was a heightened level of awareness and concern. So that was one thing. Second is that Brazilian officials were taking this very seriously. I think athletes and spectators were aware of what was going on and perhaps were taking precautions to reduce risk. And the other thing, what I've heard, is that the Olympics in Brazil was really as temperatures were beginning to drop a little bit in Rio at that time of year. So it may have been towards the end of the mosquito season there. So there were probably a number of factors, but the good news is that it really was not a significant factor at the Olympics. It's a good question.
All right, our next question here is, when does the mosquito season begin?
Well, yeah, that's. I think I'll take the first part of that, and then I'll ask Joelle to comment on that. It actually ties in very well with the previous question, and certainly, and I can speak to it from a U.S. perspective, but certainly the season will develop initially down in the south, and then as the warmer weather travels north, so will the mosquito season. So I would expect or anticipate that mosquito season has begun in the south and will quickly transition to the north. Joelle?
Yeah, just as John was describing it, it's really temperature and humidity specific in a different environmental conditions. It also depends on the species of mosquito, but in general and on average, if we see an average temperature of about 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius, that's when we start to see mosquito season, so to speak. And so just as John described, that'll start in the warmer, more tropical regions of the world, and that can actually happen all year long as well in those regions. But as we get into the more northern regions of the U.S., we have to generally wait until the average temperature is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius.
All right, thank you.
Oh, actually, one more thing I'd like to comment is we do have a map that we produce. It is available on our Ecolab.com website, where it does show mosquito season across the U.S. So if this question is coming from a U.S. caller, we have a colored map that indicates when your mosquito season is in its peak activity.
All right. Our next question is around larvicides and how effective are they?
Okay, I can take that one. So larvicides can be very effective against the larval stages of mosquitoes. So there are a few different products that are out there, but most of them contain a bacteria-based product that when the larval stages feed upon it, they do not develop into the adult stages. So it really stops the life cycle at that point. We've seen really good success with these type of products as long as they're applied appropriately. So you do have to make sure they come in different types of applications. So it can come in a briquette type form. It can come in a granular form. It can come in a liquid form. And it really, you need to know and ensure that you are making the right application for the water source that is at risk or in question of being a potential mosquito breeding site. So this is one of those situations where your pest management provider can work closely with you to identify which product is going to be most effective for you. But in general, when applied appropriately, these can be extremely effective. And it's a really critical component of that three-step program that I described, that is Ecolab's approach.
All right, thank you. I'm just looking here to see what other questions we have. Dr. Hanlon, I believe this is a question that you could take. The question is, I am not currently pregnant, but will my future pregnancies be at risk if I am infected with the Zika virus?
Well, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that, so I'll make some comments, but I would recommend that for the best available and the most current information to really go to cdc.gov, and in particular you can click on the A through Z and click on Z and you'll find Zika recommendations. But from what I've seen and heard from CDC, currently there's no evidence that a woman who has recovered from Zika virus infection, that is, the virus has cleared her body, will have Zika-related pregnancy complications in the future. But once a person has been infected with Zika virus and has cleared the virus from his or her body, he or she is likely to be protected from future Zika virus infections. But certainly you'll appreciate that this is a very fluid, if you will, situation. And again, my recommendation is that the best available information that I have seen, including information from MDs who are on staff at the CDC is to go to the cdc.gov /Zika page.
All right, thank you. Another question that we have here, can pets become infected with Zika virus? Or pets, I'm sorry.
Would you like me to answer that one?
Yes, if you could, please.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's a fair question, and if the person who sent in that question wants to contact our Technical Resource Center, we will certainly do the research on that question and provide an appropriate response.
Yeah, I would just add to that, we haven't seen any evidence to suggest that that is a possibility at this time, but it's something we can look into.
Yep, if it's important to the person on the line, please drop us a note, and we'll do further research on that question.
All right, we'll take a couple more here. All right. Next question is Ecolab coming up with any chemicals protecting from mosquitoes?
So I think this question is probably around whether or not Ecolab is developing any repellent-based products for mosquitoes. And I would say it's not a currently active project at this time. I mean, some things can always change in the future, but I can comment that at this point we don't have anything in the development around that, but there are some very effective products out there. As I mentioned, DEET-based products can last up to 8 hours in repelling mosquito activity. So that would be a highly recommended product, as well as the Keratin product that I mentioned before. So not at this time, but not something that might change in the future too.
All right. And one last question is, how do I get more information on the Ecolab program?
So I can take that one. We have a lot of information about not only the Ecolab program, but also just some information and fact sheets and the infographic that I mentioned as well. If you want to take a look, it's available on ecolab.com website. There's a lot of information there, as well as some of the other resources that I mentioned too for the CDC, and WHO has a lot of information on mosquitoes and Zika virus in particular. But if you're just looking for information on the program and the pest management side of things, you'll find a lot of that on ecolab.com.
All right. Again, I would like to thank everyone for attending today's presentation. A recording of today's presentation will be available later this week on ecolab.com. Have a wonderful rest of your day.